Chapter 853. So similar yet so different. 3. I'm fucking exhausted. The first thing Ren did upon returning from work was lay down on the soft couch in his house. Feeling his body sink into the sofa, he felt his body slowly relax. Yeah, this is how it should be. The lights were closed, and the only light that filtered through was from the narrow gap of the curtains on his left. It was quiet around him. Hey, brother. But that quietness was broken by the softly spoken words of a little girl. A soft smile appeared on Ren's face when he looked at the little girl. What is it, Nola? In her hand was a small ball which she handed to him. Want to play? Play? At this time. Checking his watch, it was 2100 hours. It was rather late, but seeing the pitiful look on his sister's face, he relented. Well, fine. Picking up his jacket, he left the house alongside Nola. Here. The two played catch and throw. When one would throw, the other would catch. A rather simple game. A gentle breeze blew past the empty park the two were in as the soft giggles of his sister filled the air. Haha, too strong. The two played for a long time. Ren had lost track of the time as he immersed himself in the soft giggles of her sister. Oh damn. He ended up throwing a little too hard and the ball flew behind the bushes. I'm sorry, Nola. He quickly apologized. It's fine, brother. But the little angel that she was, Nola sweetly smiled and trotted to where the ball fell. Her figure disappeared behind the bushes in the distance. Ren waited where he was with a soft smile on his face. He waited for who knows how long. He just stood there staring at the bushes with a smile. He didn't know when, but the ball appeared right beneath his feet, but Nola was no longer in sight. But he just remained where he was and waited. Waited there while blankly staring at the ball at his feet. Ren. That was when he heard a couple of shouts from the distance. When he turned his head, he found two familiar figures. Mom, Dad, you're also here to play? Play. Samantha's eyes started to water and Ronald placed his hand over her shoulder. For God's sake, Ren. It's been 10 years already. You need to start moving on. You can't just continue coming outside every day after work to stare emptily at a ball. With tears dropping from her eyes, Samantha's entire body trembled. Her eyes were swollen red and she looked to be in pain. It's time to move on, please. For you and for everyone, you need to move on. You can't be like this. No, but... Tuck. Ren weakly kicked the ball ahead of him. Would you believe me if I told you she's the one asking me to come and play with her? Well... He shrugged his shoulders. What would you know? You died alongside her. When he turned his head, everything turned quiet as their figures disappeared. Before he knew it, he was standing in the empty park by himself. He kicked the ball once more before turning around and heading back home. I'll see you again tomorrow. I still remember the first time that I realized that I could travel back in time. I was excited at first. Recalling the faces of my parents as they died in front of my very eyes and being helpless to help them, I felt something tight pierce my chest. I was never born talented, and even after regressing I was no different. Still, what you couldn't achieve with talent, you could achieve with money. That was what I thought back then. It was a naive thought of mine. Even when I became the richest man in the world, the only thing that I chanced upon was the sight of my parents' deaths. But that was okay. Dying once more, I realized that I had once again retained my memories from my previous life. How great. What I couldn't achieve in the previous 2 lives, I could do in the third, right? Maybe not the third, but what about the fourth? That didn't work? Really? What about a 5th time? Didn't even last as long as the previous times. Was talent really the key to achieving the perfect ending? The ending in which we survived the calamity and everyone that I cared about survived? I wasn't sure when, but I did develop talent at some point. The seed of limit, as he called it. I chanced upon it after hearing Kevin speak about it, and my limit was removed. Great. I tried again, and 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 again. Maybe next time. So close. I know where I went wrong. So close. Phew. I was just about to stab him in the core. What did I do wrong this time? Kevin. What? Wife, what? Is it my fault this time? Can he be killed? What? That's bullshit. Where How did I die? How did I go wrong this time? I killed everyone that stood in my way and took all the cheats for myself. Am I really the problem? I'm not the problem. He is the problem. Why am I back? I killed him. Why am I suddenly back? What? Only Kevin can kill Jezebeth? What? Why couldn't he kill him? Why is he so weak? Did I take too many cheats? Why did he fail again? I took nothing this time. Fail. This can't be. Again. I did everything. Why won't he kill him? Kill me. I want to die. Why do I even exist? Help. Who am I? At a certain point I lost track of who I was. Ren Dover? Samantha Dover? Nola Dover? Ronald Dover? Amanda Stern? Jean Horton? Emma Rochefield? Muzzle. Names I was familiar with yet started to fade from my mind. I was losing track of myself and I didn't want that. I wanted to cling to whatever was left of them so that I wouldn't lose sight of myself. But the more I died and the more I witnessed what I saw, the more my mind numbed. I felt my emotions slip, myself slip, and I started to change. I was horrified by what I had become, but at the same time, I embraced who I was. If it helped me get out of this hell, then so be it. And so I sealed everything away. My emotions and what made me, me. I just wanted it to end. I lost count of the times I killed those with whom I was once close with. I became something, an existence that even the Demon King feared, but that was never what I wanted. By now I just wanted to die, see the end of it. The tunnel looked endless and I saw no light in it. I tasted death so many times that I became familiar with it. The brief moment when I died and regressed became one of the most peaceful and enjoyable moments of my life. Sometimes I'd just kill myself to relieve such moments. Too bad they were far too short for me to properly enjoy. It seemed like I was fated to suffer for eternity, and I almost lost hope. I tried and tried and tried and tried with no one time ever getting close to the end. That all changed, however, when I came to learn of everything. Suddenly, the tunnel, which seemed to be completely dark, shone brilliantly. I didn't hesitate and I walked toward that tunnel. It was the light that would finally free me from this hell. The closer I got, the more liberated I felt, and the moment I crossed it, I found myself standing in an empty world where the floor was white and I could see my reflection in. In front of me was none other than the existence that came to be due to my actions. He too had it rough, but he was everything that I wanted to be. The perfect version of myself that still had everyone that he cared about, and the version of me that would get to live like I always dreamed to live. I am not sorry for what I did, nor will I ever be sorry for what I did. My efforts were what made this possible. I may have been consumed by my goal, and the things that I did to you may have been inexcusable, but I did what I did in order to free myself from the curse that had been binding me for the many years that I've lived. Words started to pour out of my mouth as I stared at my other self. I've always hated what I've become, but I never regretted becoming what I am today. Circumstances made me who I am today, and I embraced what I've become. I wouldn't know what I'd do if I hated myself when I already hated everything and everyone around me. I would have perhaps completely lost it by then and crumbled completely. On many occasions I was close, but somehow I always retained myself. Just barely. Once again, my feet moved on their own and I soon found myself standing close to my other self. Raising my hand, I placed my finger over his chest like he had done to me moments before. I don't regret any of the actions that I took. I'm not sorry, I will never be sorry, and I will never, ever regret my actions. I made sure to emphasize this part. Regret only came to those who felt sad or disappointed with their actions. I didn't feel sad or disappointed with anything that I did. I was content with what I did. He was the perfect evidence of it all. I did what I did because circumstances made me this way, but all the things I've come to regret in the past, I no longer do. Call me crazy, but perhaps this was all meant to be. Perhaps this endless torture that I went through, perhaps it was all for this moment and for that. A sudden glow spread from my finger and enveloped the other version of me. Closing my eyes, my body started to become lighter, and when I opened them again, I came to realize that my hand had become translucent, almost transparent. Taking several steps back, I felt light. Lighter than I ever felt before. I didn't dislike this feeling. I felt somewhat refreshed, something I hadn't felt in a very long time, and for some reason I felt somewhat relieved. Yeah, this is how it's meant to be. What a life I had. Huh. New novel chapters are published on ewebnovel.com. Unknowingly, the edges of my lips curled. Turning my attention back toward my other self, who seemed to be deeply absorbed in what I gave him, I felt my lips curl up once more. Yeah. This is how it's meant to be. The last thing I saw were tiny speckles of light that rose into the air. Finally, for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. My hell, it was finally over. When I opened my eyes again, I was met with countless tiny speckles of light that floated in the air and moved up. Staring at the floating speckles, I felt a myriad of different emotions course through my mind at that moment. In the end, all I could do was lower my head. As much as I hated you, I guess I understand where you're coming from. Staring at my very own reflection, I noticed that there was no difference in how I looked. My hair was the same color as it had always been, and my eyes were the same deep blue. That, of course, was the only thing that remained the same. Clenching and unclenching my fist, I felt power radiating through every part of my body. Knowledge that I had never known before flooded my mind, and the powers within my body started to calm down. I felt in complete harmony with myself, and never before did I feel so in tune with the world around me. Although it was faint, I could also feel something extra in the air. It was within arm's length, yet at the same time far from my reach. Is this the power that Jezebeth is so obsessed with? The records. For the very first time I could feel them, and they were far closer than they had ever been. I could feel immense power radiating from them, and I finally understood why Jezebeth sought such power so desperately. So long as I beat Jezebeth. Raising my hand, the space around me started to collapse, revealing a crimson-colored world. Taking a step forward, the space around me changed, and a familiar figure appeared in front of me. Our eyes met at that moment, and the world stopped moving. Chapter 854, The Last Battle. What is an end is also a beginning. 1. Why do I exist? It was the question that Jezebeth had wondered about ever since he was a young boy. He wasn't sure why, but for some reason he became obsessed with understanding the reason for his existence. Jezebeth had grown up hearing the same phrases over and over again: mistakes, spawns that shouldn't have existed, and so forth, as a member of a race that was constantly under attack and hunted by the other races and protectors. It was enough to make anyone wonder if they were really just a mistake, a product of a creator who had made a fatal error. Perhaps they really were right and they were indeed a mistake. But how could the creator make a mistake? That was the question that plagued Jezebeth the most. If there was a creator, then surely everything that existed was part of their plan, right? And yet, if that were the case, why were they constantly hunted and oppressed? If there was a creator, then surely everything that existed was part of their plan, right? And yet, if that were the case, why were they constantly hunted and oppressed? Jezebeth refused to accept that they were just mistakes to be hunted and destroyed like vermin. He wanted to find a purpose. No, he desired to find a purpose. A reason for their existence that went beyond simply being a target for those who saw them as inferior. His thoughts were further reinforced the moment he managed to survive the attacks of the protectors and got his hands on the first fragment. Ever since that moment, everything changed for him, and instead of being the hunted, he became the hunter. He conquered planet after planet, eradicating those who had once hunted his kind and creating contracts with those who were willing to submit. Like a tyrant, he became the most powerful being in the known universe. There was no one strong enough to oppose him. He had become the laws itself. And then, just as he was about to achieve his goal, everything reset. He found himself going back in time with nothing to show for all his efforts. That's fine, I can do it again. At first he was undeterred. He would simply gather the fragments again, he told himself, and this time he would succeed. But as the years passed and he found himself caught in a never-ending cycle of regression and recollection, he began to lose hope. Kevin. He was the anchor the records had created in order to rewind time. Kevin's birth was the moment they discovered his power and wanted to rid him of it. Unfortunately, they had discovered him too late and couldn't reverse time to the point where he had just started to rise to power. They could only make do with the anchor they created. That suited well with Jezebeth. After all, by then he was strong enough to deal with the constant regressions. But, no. What is it this time? Every time Jezebeth believed he had discovered his reason for being and came closer to his goal, it would all slip through his fingers like sand. Jezebeth was a patient person, but even his patience had its limits. He grew frustrated with the never-ending game of cat and mouse, with the universe seeming to conspire against him at every turn. And yet he refused to give up. He knew that the answers he sought were out there somewhere waiting for him to uncover them. He would keep searching and fighting until he found them. For Jezebeth there was no other option. There was no turning back for him. He was already too far gone into his obsession. Coming out of the crack, Jezebeth found himself in front of a familiar world. The last world as he called it. Looking down he could see the looks of fear and dread coming from the humans and those from the other races. Such looks were something he had grown accustomed to and he paid little attention to them. His eyes darted around the world looking for a certain someone. There he is. And he soon found him. He lay down on a patch of grass with his eyes closed. He looked to be sleeping soundly and his face seemed at utter peace. It was a strange sight to see, especially for Jezebeth who had known him for quite a long time. Gradually his eyelids opened up, revealing a pair of pristine blue eyes. His ashen white hair turned black and his chest moved up once. Turning his head, their eyes met and everything around them came to a sudden standstill. In the blink of an eye, he appeared right before his very eyes and the two of them just stared at each other. Seeing that there was something different about the Rin in front of him, Jezebeth decided to break the silence and ask, "Which one of the two are you? Does it matter?" "I guess not." Indeed, be it this Rin or the other Rin, it really didn't matter to Jezebeth. What he cared for was something else and he planned on eliminating whatever stood in his way. In fact, Jezebeth believed that things were easier now. Although he didn't outright say it, he could tell that he was up against the inferior version of Ren. Did something go wrong with his plans or were my deductions wrong? He was still feeling a little unsettled in the corner of his heart, but there was nothing he could do about it at the moment. Rumble. Rumble. The sky began to quake as it slowly started to fold together. The space around them started to crumble, and something dark started to come out of Jezebeth's body, slowly enveloping the sky above. Staring at Ren, Jezebeth's crimson eyes rippled, his soft voice echoing throughout like soft whispers. "We should end this, shouldn't we?" "Yeah." Boom. Neither one of the two moved, but everything in front of them started to collapse and the world started to quake. "If you care for your life, run and take cover." A sudden shout snapped those beneath them out of their reverie as a look of horror replaced their expressions. Liam, Monica, and everyone that can try to set up barriers to withstand the aftermath of the attack between the two. It was Amanda who was barking the orders as her gaze continued to move toward where Ren was. There was visible worry on her face, but she tried her best not to show it. There was something more important that she had to do at the moment. Something that was even more important than her very own life. "Ryan, if you can, try to communicate with as many people as possible and tell them to move where the safe spots are. Tell them that if they can't defend themselves, they must go there." "What about the demons? Do you think they'll let that happen?" Ryan rebutted while silently throwing a handful of small drones from his hand, which soon scattered in the air and transmitted his message. "Don't you think that the demons will try to use this chance to attack us? Sticking together. I don't think it's a very good idea. Do you think they even have time to worry about others when they'll be annihilated by the aftermath of their fight?" It seemed like Ryan was still unaware of the scale of the battle that was about to take place. She didn't blame him for it, but at the same time she was frustrated by it. Still, she didn't show it and just rebutted him calmly. "You'll see once the two start. Once they start, the thing they'll be worried about the most is their life, not ours." Amanda could only feel dread at the thought of their fight, but she was quick to dispel such thoughts. Reminding Ryan once again to do as she said, she looked around and looked for the highest point she could find. Read latest chapters at fruinovel.com only. Her eyes soon paused on a tall skyscraper that was still somehow intact. Without wasting a single second, she rushed toward it, and within seconds she was already upon it. Hap. Arriving at the building, her feet pressed against the side of the building and she walked up the building, her legs jumping from window to window. She was extremely agile and in a matter of seconds she was already right at the top of the building. This is good enough. It was a great vantage point, and when she looked up she could see Ren's features more clearly. Unlike before, he looked normal. How he always looked, and he stood facing the Demon King face to face. They seemed to be exchanging a few words amongst each other, but she was too far away to even hear what they were saying. Not that she cared. Hugh. Amanda took a few deep breaths, retrieved her bow and then closed her eyes. While she pulled against the string of her bow, there was no arrow to be seen, and the bow remained empty throughout the entire process. However, a certain power began to radiate out of her body and begin to take on an almost otherworldly appearance. Her right eye shone with a red light and faint blue circles appeared behind her. Taking another breath, her presence completely disappeared, and her gaze locked onto Jezebeth's figure. Right as she locked her gaze on him, the world around them started to collapse and, boom, the world started to quake. Chapter 855 The Last Battle. What is an end is also a beginning. Boom. I don't quite remember what happened after the world around me collapsed and an explosion sounded. I just felt something press against my body and at the same time, my body was thrown a great distance away from where I had been. Everything happened so fast that I barely had time to process it. That being said, I was in no pain. It didn't hurt, and sensing something on my right, I turned my head and swiped my finger in the air. Crack. A fissure formed in the space next to me, revealing a white hand behind it. But just as it was about to open, the space twisted and the tear moved forward several meters away. The hand did come out, but it clenched at nothing but the air. Touching my sword, the space right next to the hand distorted and a sword projection appeared. It tore through the air and aimed at the exposed hand. Unfortunately, I was just a tad bit too late, as the hand had already vanished before my sword could get to it. Swoosh. A subtle breeze blew past in the air and I turned my head to look to my right. I felt something over there, but I couldn't quite tell what it was. Ah, I see. Channeling the laws within my body and waving my hand once, the space in front of me folded like a piece of paper, and a beam passed through to the two ends of the fold. It was quite the bizarre sight, but the more familiar I became with the laws, the more I realized how endless the possibilities were. It felt as though I could control everything. You're quite good at handling the laws. I've never seen him use them before, so how did you manage to pick up on them so fast? A gentle voice tickled my ear and my head snapped backward. Jezebeth's head peeked from the crack, his crimson eyes glistening with brilliant light. Almost immediately after that, I felt my body freeze and Jezebeth stepped out into the open. Emerging from the crack, my vision suddenly filled with more than 1,000 different holographic representations of him. The chip is useless. I tried to anticipate what he would do next by analyzing his muscle movements and determining where his eyes were looking with the help of the chip in my head. However, it quickly became apparent to me that the chip was incapable of dealing with the entity in front of me. The same was true for practically all my other skills. Monarch Indifference, the One, Memory Manipulation, Dark Servant, Eyes of Kronos. Nothing worked anymore. All I could rely on at the moment were my abilities and comprehension of the laws. Don't struggle. Let this be the end of my torment. A finger moved through the air and drew near the space between my eyebrows. It looked slow, but I knew better that it was moving at speeds that one couldn't fathom. I'm sorry, but I'll have to disappoint. Breaking the restrictions on my body wasn't hard. Like. As scales began to form all over my body and cover half of my face, I felt something grow behind my back, and all of a sudden, demonic energy erupted from within my body. In light of the fact that the energy that was wreaking havoc on my body and containing me in place was demonic energy, directly exposing the demonic energy within my body, I was able to free myself from the restraints and move back, narrowly escaping his finger in the process. The rush of demonic energy was so sudden and powerful that it stunned Jezebeth, leaving him at a loss for words. Did you? He looked at me from top to bottom, his lips curling faintly as he tried to comprehend what he was seeing. To go this far. I don't know whether to call you stupid or be impressed with your actions. Jezebeth's crimson eyes shone with a brilliant hue, and the blood in my body started to boil. I felt an immense pressure bearing down on every inch of my body, causing the edges of my vision to turn black. Walk. The pain was unbearable and I let out a groan as I tried to endure it. Swoosh. Visit freeebenville.com for the Est Envel reading experience. He appeared right in front of me. I couldn't sense it before since he managed to hide it well, but now that I see you in front of me, I'm starting to wonder what exactly went through your head when you decided to ingest demonic blood into your body. Are you not aware of the fact that I can suppress just about any bloodline that exists? I struggled to say the words, but I managed to answer him. I know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I knew what he was trying to say, but I had done it out of necessity, out of a hunger for pure power. It was a risky decision, but it was one that I didn't regret. Jezebeth lifted an eyebrow in surprise as he stared at me. You see, I said as I lifted my head up and looked him straight in the eye. The fragments weren't the only things that I took from the 7 heads when I killed them. I had taken their blood as well. I knew something like this would have happened had I not done so. I pressed both of my hands together and the space above and beneath Jezebeth started to fold and tremble. Suddenly, 2 projections depicting 2 large palms appeared out of thin air, threatening to squeeze Jezebeth on the spot. Wayang. The sudden attack took Jezebeth aback and he squeezed his fist, forming a barrier around him. My palms were opened and the projections immediately followed suit, imitating my every action. While focusing on the barrier that surrounded him, I gently twisted my hands apart and made a squeezing motion. In response to the movements I made, the projections pressed against his barrier from the top to the bottom. As a result of the projections' intense pressure, cracks started to appear on the barrier that was surrounding Jezebeth. Ugh. I clenched my teeth and suppressed my groan as best I could. The pain was excruciating and I poured everything I had into those projections that were squeezing at the barrier revolving around him. Mana, demonic energy. I poured everything into them and for a moment I thought that it was working, but soon, I noticed that the cracks that had formed around the barrier were starting to heal themselves, and I clenched my teeth even harder. Still not enough? Suddenly, complex runes of golden color appeared on the fingers of the projections, and I felt my entire body tremble with pain that was unlike any other. But I bore it and poured everything I had into the projections. Crack after crack started to form around the barrier, expanding with each passing moment. Wyack. Prick, prick, prick. Finally, the cracks revolving around the barrier expanded, and I could see Jezebeth's expression within the barrier change. But it was already too late. Sierra crash. The barrier shattered into thousands of shards that spread across the sky, and the 2 projections came crashing down on Jezebeth's figure. Almost immediately after that, a nebula of residual energy floated across the sky, expanding rapidly toward my surroundings. Itchy. I was having trouble breathing and I could feel a lot of my energy leaving my body at that very moment, but as I stared at the location where Jezebeth had been, I felt hope that perhaps I had been able to accomplish something. That hope, however, did not last for long. The moment the residual energy dissipated and the sky cleared up, my heart sank. There, standing in the sky, was none other than Jezebeth, who looked no different than he did before. His eyes were calm, his complexion was the same, and his clothes and armor were completely untouched. The way he looked almost made it seem as though nothing had happened, and something clamped at my throat as my heart sank. What? How? I was in denial. I had poured almost everything that I had into that moment, and yet, despite everything that I had done, he was still completely unharmed. How was I supposed to accept that? But just as I was about to despair over the situation, I suddenly noticed a subtle trickle down the side of his mouth. It was black and looked like blood. And the moment it started to trickle down, Jezebeth's complexion paled dramatically, and he brought his hand toward his mouth. PFTT. He tried to hide it, but he failed, and right at that moment I witnessed as black blood leaked from the gap between his fingers. My heart skipped a beat at that moment and the previous misgivings I had disappeared. It seemed like my attack did in fact have an effect on him. Good. I clenched my hand, channeling all the powers within my body. Since it worked, I needed to continue. Even if the price was my body. Chapter 856, The Last Battle. What is an end is also a beginning. 3. I'm hurt. Staring at his hands, which were soaked in his own blood, Jezebeth was left in wonder. He hadn't expected his attack to be as devastating as it had been. If not for his armor, he probably would have sustained heavier injuries. It came from out of nowhere and he was barely able to resist it. Raising his head to stare at Ren, who was huffing and puffing, Jezebeth felt something boiling inside of him. Right. It's not good if I don't reciprocate his intentions. Seeing that the attack had taken a toll on him, Jezebeth suppressed his injuries and forced himself forward. With a subtle blur of his vision, he saw Ren's back in front of him and he reached out with his palm forward. Golden runes enveloped his palm and the space around his hand shattered. A blade immediately blocked the hand just as it was about to reach Ren's back. He didn't know when, but Ren had suddenly turned around and slashed with his sword. The two stared at each other silently as the space around them started to crumble. There were no words exchanged with each other like before. Neither left any time to spare any words as they distanced themselves from each other and attacked one another. Boom. The attacks were devastating, shattering the space around them and creating large waves in the air that spread throughout the entire sky. Everything beneath them tore apart, and the land disintegrated at their every exchange. Neither of the two held any advantage. While Jezebeth was indeed injured from the previous strike, Ren had exhausted himself in the process, evening things out. Shi-ying. A bright glow of terrifying pressure suddenly headed Jezebeth's way. It was fast, extremely so. In a matter of seconds it was upon him, and just as it was about to graze his nose, Jezebeth placed his palm against the side of the glow, and the glow shattered into a fine dust. Swoosh. Sensing something behind him, Jezebeth's body twisted as he kicked, and his foot hit something soft. Umph. Overhearing something, Jezebeth knew that his hit had landed, and when he came to, he saw Ren's figure hurl away from him in the sky. He didn't waste a single second of that moment. Locking his eyes on Ren's figure, Jezebeth pressed his finger forward, and a gigantic crack formed a couple of meters ahead of Ren. A large projection of his finger appeared from within the crack, and as if it had been timed just right, it moved down and directly pressed against Ren's moving figure. Boom. The attack landed squarely on Ren's body, and he spat a mouthful of blood as his body continued to hurl away from Jezebeth. Ren's body took the full force of the attack, and as his body continued to fly away from him, he spat out a mouthful of blood and coughed up more. Jezebeth did not pass up such an opportunity and followed him from behind, eventually appearing right in front of him and pressing his hand against his face as he did so. Swoosh. Attempting to contort his body and evade Jezebeth's hand, Ren acted swiftly but fell slightly short. His efforts proved futile as Jezebeth's hand firmly made contact with his face and grasped onto it tightly. Bang! Exerting an immense force, Jezebeth's hand unleashed a surge of power, propelling Ren's body through the air with great momentum. Seizing the opportunity without hesitation, Jezebeth swiftly positioned himself directly beneath Ren, extending his knee in a forceful thrust. Awk! Spit flew from Ren's mouth as he landed directly on Jezebeth's knee. Though faint, Jezebeth could make out a faint cracking sound, and he knew that Ren had sustained some injuries. He didn't let go. Jezebeth wasn't the type of person to show mercy to those against him. Grabbing Ren by the hair, he raised his head toward him and punched at his face. Bang! His fist landed squarely in his face. Bang! He didn't stop at just one punch. Bang! Jezebeth's fist was encased in a white and black glow as he continued to punch Ren's face with all of his strength while simultaneously driving his fist further forward. Bang! It wasn't long before his fist was coated in Ren's blood as it dripped down from his fist. The warm, viscous fluid trickled down, forming streams that traced intricate patterns along his fingers, carrying with it the evidence of the fierce impact. A metallic scent filled the air, mingling with the intensity of the moment, as Jezebeth's resolute gaze remained fixed upon the sight. The sight of Ren's blood became a stark reminder of all the struggle he had to go through just to get to this point, etching a lasting impression upon Jezebeth's conscience even as the battle raged on. Extending his hand forward and staring at Ren's limping figure in front of him, Jezebeth tried to reach out with his hand to absorb the laws in his body, but just as he tried, as Jezebeth's hand inched closer, a sudden rift materialized in the surrounding space, originating from the vicinity of his arm. Within the crevice, a spectral manifestation of a sword took shape, its gleaming presence amplifying the already charged atmosphere. Wai-ying. Jezebeth was left with no other option, so he let go of Ren's body as it descended from the sky. Not satisfied with what he did, Jezebeth pressed his hands together, and that was when two large projections manifested around the area Ren was in. They moved closer together and pressed directly onto Ren's body, which was falling down from the sky. Boom! With one gigantic explosion, Ren's figure came crashing down from the sky, landing against the ground beneath and creating a massive crater in the land. That should have done something. Standing where he was, Jezebeth could hear the sudden gasp of anxiety coming from those beneath. He didn't pay much attention to them and took a single step forward. Feeling his feet touch the ground, he looked down, and that was where he caught sight of Ren lying down in the middle of the crater. His clothes were a mess and so was his hair. Blood leaked down from the side of his mouth and his eyes seemed hazy. Despite that, his eyes were wide open and they were locked directly at him. Whining. As expected. The moment Jezebeth arrived, the ground beneath him trembled and something flashed right behind him. Twisting his body, Jezebeth was just barely able to avoid the incoming attack. But just as he did, a hand came grasping at his head, and he felt it smash against the hard ground beneath. Bong. Feeling the taste of dirt in his mouth, Jezebeth felt something tug at the back of his head, and his head was brought up once more before he saw the ground coming closer to him once more. Bong. A familiar taste. One that he didn't particularly like, but as he tried to move his body, his head was pulled at again, and once again his head came smacking against the hard ground beneath. Bong. It hurt quite a bit as his vision blurred. Reaching out with his hand, he grasped at the forearm that was grasping at his hand, and he squeezed with everything that he could. The sound was similar to the sound of bones breaking, and whatever was grasping at his head let go, and Jezebeth was able to move away. Recovering his bearing, Jezebeth caught sight of Ren's arm, which was bent at a weird angle and limping. He smiled at the sight and decided to go on the offensive again. As if he was going to let such an opportunity go to waste. Seeing that his right arm was injured, Jezebeth aimed for Ren's right side. Swoosh. Appearing with a sudden breeze, he aimed a punch directly at the side of Ren's exposed abdomen. Complex golden runes manifested all over his hand, and wherever his hand passed, the space around it shattered. Bang! Coming into contact with something, the space crumbled and a large explosion reverberated. Dust flew into the air, blocking his vision, but with one swipe of his hand, the dust settled, and when he looked to see the aftermath of his attack, he was surprised to see his fist hitting against the side of Ren's knee, which was raised up in front of him. Just like his fist, complex golden runes revolved around Ren's thigh. Swoosh. A fist came hurling at him from above, and Jezebeth retrieved his fist back and counterattacked with a kick, which Ren avoided by bending his body back. Bang! The aftereffects of their attack destroyed everything that was around them, and before they knew it, the crater that they were in had become even deeper. They had traveled to such a great depth that the light that was coming from the sky above them began to dim, and all that they were able to see was a tiny gap above them. Still, neither cared as they continued to fight against each other. Bang! Ren's fist managed to land directly on Jezebeth's face, sending him crashing against the ground. Ren took the moment to distance himself from him and retrieve his sword. Rumble! Rumble! The air that was close to him began to twist, and all of a sudden, a powerful force erupted from out of his body and engulfed everything that was in its path. A crack formed in the area above him, and the tip of a sword appeared from behind the gap. Almost immediately after the tip appeared, the ground began to crack and the air started to shatter. Despite the fact that Ren's complexion began to gradually pale at the sight of the sword, and the mana that was contained within his body began to drain at a rapid rate, he did not give up and continued to call forth the sword. Ugh! He gritted his teeth and his expression started to distort. Even so, his efforts began to pay off, and the sword quickly began to appear from behind the chasm, revealing its body in all of its glory. The moment the sword appeared, the area surrounding them came to a sudden standstill, and the world around them started to lose color. Creak, creak. Ren could hear his bones creaking under the immense pressure that the sword was producing, but he didn't care and fixed his eyes on Jezebeth, who was staring at the sword in front of him with deep apprehension. Go! Opening his palm, he pointed his finger at Jezebeth, and the sword moved toward him. Rumble! Rumble! The surroundings shook massively and the earth around them collapsed. Wherever the sword passed, it would leave nothing but destruction behind. Visit freebnol.com for the best novel reading experience. Yet, amidst the cacophony and devastation, Jezebeth maintained an unwavering composure, fixating his gaze upon the approaching sword with an eerie calmness. In a gesture that defied the imminent danger, he gradually closed his eyes, succumbing to a serene stillness that permeated both his external surroundings and the recesses of his own mind. At first glance he looked to have given up, but Ren knew that this was not the case. A pregnant silence descended upon the world, intertwining with the tranquility of Jezebeth's demeanor. When his eyes finally unveiled their vision once more, Jezebeth found himself inexplicably positioned directly behind the sword, his hand instinctively reaching out to make contact with its hilt. Grip. The ensuing sequence of events left Ren utterly dumbfounded as the unstoppable momentum of the sword abruptly halted under Jezebeth's unwavering grip. Time seemed suspended, allowing for the gravity of the situation to sink in, as the sixth movement, the most powerful movement in his arsenal, found itself tamed by the sheer force of Jezebeth's will. However, the astonishment didn't end there. Arch! With an abrupt cry that pierced the air, the armor encasing Jezebeth's body shattered, revealing the raw, sinewy contours of his musculature beneath. His bulging muscles pulsated with an imposing presence, exuding an aura of formidable power. Fixing his penetrating gaze silently upon Ren, Jezebeth's hand began to move with a deliberate purpose, manipulating the sword's trajectory until it aligned menacingly with Ren, its tip pointing directly at him like a harbinger of impending doom. How? Staring at the tip of his own sword, Ren was left utterly shocked and his face turned white. Unfortunately for Ren, he did not have the luxury of continuing to dwell on the matter for too long, and as he clenched his teeth, power began to erupt from his body as veins began to protrude along the sides of his neck. The sword shattered into hundreds of pieces and he puked up blood. He had no choice but to cancel his own move. Pfe. He stumbled a couple of steps back as a result, and it was right then that he felt something head his way. Out of pure instinct, he moved his hand away from his mouth and punched forward. Bang! His fist landed squarely against another and he was pushed several steps back. He felt his blood boil at the collision, but he bore through the pain and pushed himself forward. He thrust a kick forward. Bang! His kick once again connected with something and the surroundings crumbled apart. Bang! This went on for quite a while until, eventually, Jezebeth opened his mouth and muttered. Seal. Chains burst from beneath the ground and coiled around Ren's body like snakes. The chains came from everywhere. Above him, the side of the crater, and beneath the ground, coiling around every part of his body and trapping him like a cocoon. A faint white glow manifested around his body as complex golden runes covered his entire body. The chains that were surrounding him showed signs of cracking, but they didn't break immediately, and that was what Jezebeth was looking for. Taking advantage of that moment, he appeared right in front of Ren and punched directly toward his abdomen. Bang! A clean hit. Landing his fist against his abdomen, Jezebeth watched as Ren's expression distorted with pain, and his body floated up. The chains that were binding his body shattered, and his figure hurled up into the sky, coming out from the hole they were in. Stepping forward, Jezebeth's vision shifted, and when he looked down he saw Ren's body coming at him from below. Extending his hand forward, he opened up his palm. Golden runes appeared all over his hand, and just as Ren's body was about to come crashing against his palm, his figure suddenly disappeared. Swoosh! It all happened so fast that Jezebeth was barely able to react. Struck by an overwhelming force that jolted against the side of his cheek, Jezebeth's vision distorted, spinning wildly as he found himself hurtling uncontrollably toward the ground below. The speed of his descent was nothing short of astonishing. A faint vapor cloud appeared behind him as he fell. As he cast his gaze downward, his eyes widened in disbelief at the sight that awaited him. A vast multitude of sword projections adorned with intricate golden runes erupted from the very ground, their razor-sharp tips ominously aimed at him. The sheer magnitude of the spectacle sent shockwaves through Jezebeth's core, forcing him to employ every available resource in his arsenal to halt his descent before meeting the deadly convergence of the sword projections. In a desperate display of acrobatics, he managed to halt himself mere inches away from the lethal array, a narrow escape that left his core pounding with anxiety. However, before he could fully savor his fleeting victory, an unforeseen assault struck him from behind, ravaging his body with searing pain that reverberated through every fiber of his being. Bang! A resounding impact echoed through the air, accompanied by an involuntary cry of pain that escaped Jezebeth's lips. Every inch of his body felt the intrusion as sharp objects pierced his flesh, puncturing his arms and legs and staining the ground with his own blood. Overwhelmed by the excruciating agony that consumed him, he gritted his teeth, suppressing his pained groans by a thread. The intensity of the pain threatened to overwhelm him entirely, yet through sheer resilience he managed to maintain a semblance of control, and he shut his mouth. Screaming was a waste of energy. With his forearm forward, Jezebeth moved his body up and felt the sharp ends of the projections through his arms, legs and chest. He was pierced almost everywhere, but thankfully, none of the spikes had managed to hit him in his core, which was still intact. Clenching his fist, the sword projections around him shattered completely, and Jezebeth immediately felt better. Despite that, he didn't let his guard down, and noticing a certain shadow right above his head, he hastily moved his head to the side. Bang! He was glad he did, as immediately after he moved his head, a foot came crashing against where he previously was, stomping at the ground beneath. Arc! Right as the foot landed, Jezebeth pulled his hand forward and grabbed at the foot, clenching with all his might. Crack! Immediately bones cracked and Rin started to fall down next to him. Suppressing his pain and bringing his leg up, Jezebeth helped himself up and elbowed Rin cleanly in the face. Bang! The hit was clean, and immediately after his elbow came crashing against the side of his face, Rin became disoriented. Jezebeth didn't waste the opportunity, and despite the pain that was tormenting his body, he raised his hand and punched his face. Bang! His fist missed, but at the same time that he punched with his fist, he brought his head down and their heads smacked against one another. Bang! His head throbbed massively at his action, and Jezebeth felt disoriented, but the same could be said for Rin, who seemed to have lost consciousness for a split second. Bang! Clenching his fist, Jezebeth landed a hit directly in his face, smacking his head to the side. The fist sent Ren's head moving to the other side, and Ren's eyes turned white at that moment. The sight made Jezebeth's body tremble as excitement started to course down every fiber of his being, and he swallowed a mouthful of saliva. I'm close. I'm almost there. He could feel Ren's breath weakening with his fist and smacking his head once again. Jezebeth felt Ren's breath almost drop to a pitiful low. Bang! 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 Yes. I can feel it. Ren's lips were busted and blood leaked from his head and lips. Extending his hand forward, Jezebeth brought his hand to Ren's face, and chains burst from beneath the ground, binding Ren at his arms and legs. Plague! Sealing his every movement, Jezebeth clenched Ren's face with his hand. Taking a small breath, he tried to feel for the laws within his body, and when he did feel them, his body trembled once more. Come to me. A white glow burst from Ren's body all of a sudden, and the surroundings started to quake. Rumble. Rumble. Power started to enter Jezebeth's body, and his surroundings flashed between Earth and what seemed to be an enormous library. The entire library was covered in an ethereal glow, and right toward the very distance he could see a small patio made out of wood and surrounded by glass. There, he saw a book lying down on top of a small altar, and Jezebeth's breath stopped. The records. Never before had he been able to see them so clearly, and for a moment he didn't know what to do as his mind blanked. When he came to, he found that his surroundings were back to normal and that his hand was still grasping at Ren, whose entire body was extremely husky. Almost as if everything had been sucked out of him. All the power that Ren previously had was gone, and silence predominated their surroundings. Weakly, Ren opened his eyes to expose his two blue eyes, and their eyes locked. For the first time in a while, Jezebeth opened his mouth and spoke to him. If it had been the other you, perhaps things might have ended differently. Why thiring? But just as Jezebeth was about to suck the very last bit of the laws that were contained within Ren's body, he felt something powerful coming from behind him, and when he turned his head, he was shocked to see a white streak covered in golden runes head his way. What? Shocked, Jezebeth tried to move, but two hands grasped at his forearms. When he looked down, his gaze met Ren's. You, let go. Jezebeth tried to free himself from the grasp, but he was baffled to see that his grip was extremely tight, preventing him from moving. Let go. How is this possible? How do you still have power left? Panic started to spread across Jezebeth's face as he tried to free himself from his grip, but Rin just refused to let go, and soon his mouth parted open. Indeed, if it had been the other me, the result would have been completely different. His voice was weak and frail, as if it was about to break at any moment, but his eyes seemed clearer than ever. Let go. Unlike him, I don't work alone. Wawong. The world turned white. Chapter 857, The Last Battle. What is an end is also a beginning. 4. I won't bother creating a signal for you. I'm sure you'll know best when using the arrow, but Don't use it unless you're certain it's going to hit. I trust you'll know the exact moment when to release the arrow, and you only have one shot, so make sure it counts. Standing at the top of the building with her empty bow drawn, Amanda kept reminding herself of the words that Rin had thrown at her just moments before leaving for one of the pillars. Right before her very eyes, a battle of a scale that she couldn't fathom was happening, and all she could do was stare at it with her breath held tightly. How am I supposed to interfere in that? Amanda kept wondering to herself the same thing over and over again as sweat trickled down the side of her face and her grip on the bow tightened. Bang! Bang! The aftermath of their battle reached all the way where she was, and a strong wind pressure blew past her, scattering her hair away. She had to channel her mana on her feet in order to remain in the same spot, and when everything cleared up she noticed a sudden change in the battle ahead. Oh no! Amanda's heart clenched at the sight of Rin getting pummeled by the Demon King, who punched him directly in the face and tore the earth beneath the two. Immediately, the circular projections behind her started to line up, from largest to smallest, and her entire body started to tremble. She was just about to call forth her arrow when she was once again reminded of Ren's words, and she stopped herself. Not yet. The time wasn't ripe yet and she knew it. Bang! Seeing Jezebeth punch him again, Amanda flinched but didn't look away and kept her gaze fixed on him. More than ever she wanted to interfere, but she stopped herself again and silently clenched her teeth. With another hit, Amanda watched as the Demon King placed his hand over Ren's face, exposing his back to her. Shortly after, a familiar set of golden runes manifested on his hand. The same happened to Ren, whose face became colored in golden runes that slowly moved away from his face and moved to the Demon King's hand. The world around them started to twist. Rather quickly Ren's body started to shrivel up like a mummy, and Amanda could no longer sit still. Placing her foot forward, she drew a silent breath and an arrow manifested on her bow. Immediately after the arrow appeared, soft whispers echoed in the air, and golden runes floated around the area she was in. Her bow became increasingly heavy, and Amanda felt her entire body burn at that moment as she watched her hands age. Even so, despite the pain she was experiencing, her gaze was fixed on Jezebeth's exposed back. At the same time this was happening, Ren's body started to shrivel up more and more, and right when he seemed to be on the verge of dying, Amanda finally let go of the string. Twa. She was unable to recall exactly what occurred after that, but the moment she let go of the string, her bow disintegrated into a fine powder that dispersed in front of her, and the world around her became entirely white. What followed after was a strange silence that seemed to envelop the entire world. The world soon regained its color, but it was unfortunate that right as that happened, her world turned white and she felt her body limp forward. Thump. Twang. Suddenly the world went white and Jezebeth felt a sharp pain in his back. His entire body shook violently and pain, unlike anything he had ever experienced, coursed through every part of his body. Why you? When he lowered his head, he saw Rin staring at him while smiling weakly. With both hands on his forearms, a glow emanated from them, and Jezebeth could feel the laws erupting from Ren's body. Och! It seemed as though something was sapping all of the energy from within his body, and he could literally feel himself becoming weaker with each passing second. On the other hand, Ren's body started to become fuller and fuller, and gradually he returned to his normal looks. I can't. Feeling everything that he had worked hard for slip before his very eyes, Jezebeth raised his head and smacked his head against his. Bang! It hurt a lot and his head throbbed, but the pain was negligible compared to what he was feeling at his back. Thankfully, his actions weren't for nothing and he felt the grasp on his hands loosen. Ah, ah. Thump, thump. He stumbled back and separated himself from Ren, falling butt first against the ground. Itchy. Taking heavy gulps of air, he tried his best to channel whatever energy he had left inside of his body, but much to his horror he realized that his tank was completely empty. Rustle. Rustle. Feeling movement from the direction opposite him, Jezebeth looked up to see Ren wobbling toward him. Despite having taken his energy, he too looked rather weak, and with both hands hung low he moved to where he was. Staring at his figure, Jezebeth clenched his teeth and forced himself up. Like him, he stumbled forward, and despite everything that he was feeling, he continued to move toward him until they were just about a few meters away from each other. Bang! Neither of the two wasted any seconds and they both threw a fist at each other. Both hits landed squarely on each other's cheeks and their heads tilted back. That apparently wasn't enough as they both retrieved their fists and punched at each other once again. Bang! Visit feebnovel.com for the best novel reading experience. Gone were their powerful attacks that tore the air and destroyed the earth. At the moment, the fight had taken a complete turn as the two of them fought one another with nothing but their bodies. From afar, be it demons or those from the four races, everyone looked in their direction as the two of them exchanged moves with one another. Despite them being visibly weaker than they were before, none dared to make a single move as they continued to stare at the two of them with their breaths held. They knew that the victor of the fight would decide the fate of the war. Bang! Bang! The two of them were rather evenly matched as they exchanged blow after blow. When Jezebeth landed a hit, so would Ren, and the cycle would repeat. Both of them continued to force themselves on the other in spite of the fact that their punches were getting sloppier and slower with the passage of time. However, neither of them seemed to care. Walk. Bang. Exchanging blows, the two of them stumbled backward, and just as Jezebeth was about to move again, he suddenly felt his back burst with pain, and his movements halted for a split second. That was all Ren needed to rush forward and headbutt him squarely in the face, sending him reeling backward. Thump. Falling back on his butt, Jezebeth tried to stand up but found that he no longer had the energy to do so, and as he moved his head up he saw a foot land squarely on his face, sending his face crashing against the ground. Irk. He didn't lift his head up from that moment on as he blankly stared at the sky. He wanted to move but couldn't. Almost every part of his body was broken, and the energy in his body had long faded from him. He was just an empty shell of his former self, and realizing his own weakness, he couldn't help but clench his teeth in indignation. I was so close. He managed to mutter a few words at that moment as he stared at the sky, which had turned blue once more. There had always been something about the cloudless blue skies that made him feel at peace. They always reminded him of his home, the place he used to once call home and where his parents lived. He had planned on secluding himself from the world the moment he got his hands on the records and learned of the truth. His plan consisted of staying in a world such as this one. A quiet and peaceful one. One that reminded him of his home planet, but... Thump. A shadow cast over his vision as two deep blue eyes appeared in his vision. Staring directly at them, Jezebeth felt everything crumble down, and though he was indignant, he accepted the situation. Deep down in his heart he had always known that failure was a very real possibility, and he had long prepared for it. It wasn't in vain as his eyes slowly closed and the world around him turned quiet. There was no regret in his mind, only pity. If only. He never got to finish that thought. Everything ceased from that very moment, and the existence known as Jezebeth disappeared from the world. I found it hard to breathe or speak at this very moment. Almost every part of me was broken and I could barely keep my eyes focused. All that was within my vision was the hazy outline of Jezebeth's body, and with my best efforts, I tried to keep my hand on top of him. I could see a multitude of golden scribbles and runes fly in the air, but I was having a hard time keeping conscious. Despite that, I continued to keep my hand on Jezebeth's body, and the world around me started to shift. I felt a sinking feeling wash all over me and my vision suddenly started to shatter. In that brief moment before I completely lost consciousness, I found the scenery around me changing. It looked like I was standing in the middle of a patch of green, but I wasn't sure. All of a sudden, Jezebeth's body started to disappear, and golden runes floated on top of me. My hand soon touched the ground and I felt something linger over my fingertips. In my best efforts, I was able to catch a glimpse of several metallic shards as well as a faint black mist that lingered over them. Reaching out with my hand, I clenched at the shards and my vision finally turned completely dark.